All right. Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where everything is connected. Good to see y'all, and here to do a little book reading. It's been a couple weeks since we visited the Ministry for the Future. And I think we're on chapter 32. And everybody here, we got people listening in on all the platforms. Hello. Thanks for joining, guys. Thanks for being here. Bella Jean, American Nihilist, Osama, whoever's on Rockfin, Obsolete. And I'm sure more people will filter in as we go along, but anyways, I think many of you have read this story, but maybe some of you haven't. And we're making progress, but not quickly enough. I might have to do like a couple of these a week to get done with this book by the end of the year. All right, so chapter 32. Mary. Dick, what are you and your team doing to make current economics more helpful to the people of the future? Oh, by the way, I wanted to just say, if you're listening in and you appreciate the book reading, please, I ask that people donate like $1 or $2 via the direct donate links. They're all in the description boxes of the Rockfins and the YouTubes, and thank you in advance. Mary says, Dick, what are you and your team doing to make current economics more helpful to the people of the future? Dick, we've been looking at discount rates. We're studying what India is doing to their discount rate. It's very interesting. Mary, how does that relate to future people? Dick, it's very central. We discount the future generations. It works by analogy to how we treat money. With money, a euro you own now is worth something more than the promise of a euro that will come to you a year from now. How come? If you have it now, you can spend it now. Or you can bank it and earn interest on it, like that. So how much is the discount? How does it work? The rate varies. It works like this. If you would take 90 euros now, rather than the promise of 100 euros a year from now, that discount rate is 0.9 a year. Applying that rate, 100 euros coming to you in 20 years is worth the same as about 12 euros today. If you go out 50 years, that 100 euros you would get then is worth about half a euro today. That seems like a steep rate. It is. I'm just using it to make it clear to you. But steep rates are pretty common. Someone once won the pseudo Nobel in economics for suggesting a 4% discount rate on the future. That's still quite high. All the different rates and time intervals get traded, of course. People bet on whether the value will go up or down relative to what got predicted. The time value of money, it's called. But this gets applied to other things. Oh, yes, that's economics. Since everything can be converted into its money value, when you need to rate the future value of an action to decide whether to pay to do it now or not, you speak of that thing using a discount rate. But those future people will be just as real as you and I. Why discount them in the same way you do money? It's partly to help decide what to do. See, If you rate all future humans as having equal value to us alive now, they become a kind of infinity, whereas we're finite. If we don't go extinct, eventually there will eventually have been quite a lot of humans. I've read 800 billion, 800 billion, or even several quadrillion. It depends on how long you think we'll go on before going extinct or evolving into something else. Whether we can outlast the death of the sun and so on. Even if you take a lower estimate, you get so many future people that we don't rate against them. If we were working for them as well as ourselves, then really we should be doing everything for them. Every good project we can think of would be rated as infinitely good, thus equal to all the other good projects. And every bad thing we do to them is infinitely bad and to be avoided. But since we're in the present and trying to decide which projects to fund, with limited resources, you have to have a finer instrument than infinity when calculating costs and benefits. Assuming you're going to only be able to afford a few things, and you want to know which of them get you the most benefits for the least cost, which is what economics is for. Exactly. Best distribution of scarce resources, and so on. So given that, how do you pick a discount rate? Out of a hat. What? There's nothing scientific about it. You just pick one. It might be a function of the current interest rate, but that shifts all the time. So really, you just choose. So the higher the discount rate, the less we spend on future people. That's right. And right now, everyone chooses a higher rate. Yes. How does that get justified? The assumption is that future people will be richer and more powerful than we are, so they'll deal with any problems we create for them. But now that's not true. Not even close to true. But if we don't discount the future, we can't quantify costs and benefits. But if the numbers lie, they do lie, which allows us to ignore any costs or benefits that will occur more than a few decades down the line. This is how it all works, yeah. More than a few decades down the line. It says, say someone asks for $10 million to enact a policy that will save 1 billion people in 200 years. 1 billion people are worth a huge number of dollars. If you take a rough average of the insurance company's monetary valuations for a human life. But using the 0.9 discount rate, that huge number might equal only $5 million today. So do we spend $10 million now to see what is calculated as being worth $5 million after the discount rate is applied? No, of course not. Because of the discount rate. Right. Happens all the time. Regulators go to the government budget office to get a mitigation project approved. Budget office uses the discount rate and says absolutely no, doesn't pencil out. All because of the discount rate. Yes, it's a number put on an ethical decision. A number which can't be justified on its merits. Right. This often gets admitted. No one denies future people are going to be just as real as us, so there isn't any moral justification for the discounting. It's just for our own convenience. Plenty of economists acknowledge this. Robert Solow said we ought to act as if the discount rate were 0. Ray Harrod said the discount rate was a polite expression for rapacity. Frank Ramsey called it ethically indefensible. He said it came about because of a weakness of the imagination. But we do it anyway. We kick their ass. Easy to do when they're not here to defend themselves. True. I like to think of it as a rugby match with present-day people as the New Zealand All Blacks playing against a team of 3-year-olds who represent the people of the future. We kick their ass. It's one of the few games we're good at winning. I can't believe it. Yes, you can. But what do? We're the ministry for the future, so we step in and play for the 3-year-olds. We substitute for them. We play rugby against the All Blacks. Yes, they're pretty good, so they'll kick our asses too, unless we get as good as they are. But can we do that? We may be sticking with this analogy a little too far here, but let's do that for the fun of it. So now I'm thinking about the movie about the South African football team. When the World Cup was held in South Africa, they were a beginner team, but they ended up winning it all. How did they do that? You should watch the movie. Basically, they were playing for more than the game. The other teams were playing because that's what they did. It was their profession. But those South Africans, they were playing for Mandela. They were playing for their lives. So, is there a way we can make the calculations better? This is where India comes into it. Since the heat wave, they've been leading the way in terms of re-examining everything. So regarding this issue, you could just set a low discount rate, of course. But Badim tells me that in India, it was traditional to talk about the 7 generations before and after you as being your equals. You work for the 7 generations. Now they're using that idea to alter their economics. Their idea is to shape the discount rate like a bell curve, with the present always at the top of the bell. So from that position, the discount rate is nearly nothing for the next 7 generations. Then it shifts higher at a steepening rate. Although they're also modeling the reverse of that, in what you would have a high discount rate, but only for a few generations, after which it goes to 0. Either way, you remove the infinities from the calculation and give a higher value to future generations. Good idea. We've been running modeling exercises to see how various curves play out in the creation of new cost-benefit equations. It's pretty interesting. I want to see that. Run with that. The All Blacks will be trying to tackle us. I warn you, they tackle to hurt. They'll be trying to get us to cough up the pill. When you get hit, pass the ball to me. I'll be on the inside to receive. I will. Good on you, mate. All right. Chapter 33. I'm going to take a bit of a caffeine break. They killed us, so we killed them. Everyone in our cell had helped to clean up after the heat wave. You don't forget a thing like that. I myself didn't speak for 3 years. When I did, I could only say a few things. It was like I was 2 years old. I was killed that week and had to start over again. Lots of the children of Kali had gone through similar experiences. Or worse. Not all of my comrades were human. It was a question of identifying the guilty and then finding them and getting to them. The research and detective work was done by another wing. A lot of the guilty were in hiding or on fortress islands or otherwise protected. Even when identified, it wasn't easy to get near them. They knew the danger. Methods were worked up over many iterations. We took a lot of losses at first. Of course, suicide bombing is often effective, but this is a crude and ugly way to go about it, and uncertain. Most of us didn't want to do it. We weren't that crazy, and we wanted to be more effective than that. Much better to kill and disappear. Then you can do it again. From that, drones are best. Or for that, drones are best. We were just talking about drones, weren't we, the other day? Future warfare. For that, drones are best. Much of the job becomes intelligence, finding the guilty, finding their moments of exposure. Not easy, but once accomplished, boom. The drones keep getting faster and faster. The guilty often have defenses, but those can often be overwhelmed by numbers. A swarm of incoming drones the size of sparrows, moving as hundreds moving at hundreds or even thousands of meters per second. Those are hard to stop. The guilty died by the dozens in those years. Eventually, they stayed indoors for the most part. At that point, a decade into the campaign, they knew they were in trouble. Security redoubled. It became a question, or several questions. Were there still people left, so guilty they deserved to die? Yes to that one. Could we get to them? Harder. We sometimes joined domestic staffs or landscaping crews and worked for years. Other times, it was a matter of breaking and entering. Sometimes, they could be caught during transit, while less protected. Sometimes their bodyguards would have to be killed too. They shouldn't have taken work like that. Protecting mass murderers makes you complicit in mass murder, so we didn't worry about them. The only thing we worried about was what the guilty ones always call collateral damage. In other words, the accidental killing of innocents to kill your target. The guilty do it all the time. It's one sign of their guilt. But we don't. It's a principle. Kali is very fair and very meticulous. If to kill 100 guilty, you had to kill one innocent. No, it's against the law. So it is often very tricky. One time I had to crawl in through air ducts. One intake had been left unmonitored, a mistake, all in the dark. But the building's plan was clear in my mind. I got to the intake not monitored, broke into it and crawled, left, right, up, down. I had with me a plastic knife, pliers, and screwdriver. So unscrew the screws holding the master bedroom ceiling vent screen in place from above, using the pliers in silence and moving very slowly. Took 2 hours. Then got to feet, making sure feet have not gone to sleep. Confirm location of guilty one by night vision goggles and micro periscope looking through vent slots. This one was a weapon manufacturer. There are a lot of them, but the ones at the top who own majority shares, they aren't so many. Several hundred identified at this point, all death dealers. Mass murderers for cash. You may know some. Leap in the air, come down on the vent, crash down into room, right on bed, trailing rope ladder. Stab the guilty, one in the torso quickly 4 times, then the neck several times. Night vision goggles make blood look black. Guilty one dead for sure. Back up rope ladder, ignoring other person also in bed, now on floor, shocked into immobility, or perhaps trying to avoid attention. Good idea. Back through air ducts, crawling fast, out into compound wall, up to roof, drone waiting to carry me up and away like packaged goods. Now to spread the headset photos, spread the story. The guilty need to know, even in their locked compounds. In their beds asleep at night, the children of Kali will descend on you and kill you. There is no hiding, there is no escape. One down, several hundred to go, although the list might get extended because Kali sees all, and the children of Kali are not going away until the guilty are gone. Be advised. I rather like that chapter, don't you? Isn't it interesting that you can discuss stuff like this in a fictional way? I always find it interesting that when you're talking about news or real life, when you're talking about conspiracies and what the powerful are doing or what we should do about what the powerful are doing, like those things are super threatening and dangerous and all that kind of stuff. But you can talk about this stuff in a fictional way, right? In movies and books and songs and all, in a fictional way, you can say what needs to be said. But I especially like the part, I like the part about the fact that if you are working for psychopaths, you know who you're working for. You're not innocent. You're not. It's just my job. It's like what was it? The Nazi thing. People try to make themselves like innocent or not complicit by saying I was just doing my job. Well, we all make choices in life, right? If you're working for the psychopaths, you get what you get. You get what you get eventually, and even if it's just karmic, even if it's just a stain on your soul for several lifetimes. I don't know. Yeah, it would be different if you suppose that outright, wouldn't it? Okay. All right. Hey. Yeah. Chapter 34. Notes for Badim again on trip with B and Mary to India. Flying to Delhi, met by Chandra, no longer in government, but asked by B to meet us and introduce us to new minister and staff. C takes us into government house and introduces us to her replacement and his staff. Meet and greet, then updates. Discussion of solar radiation management applied post-heat wave. They claim to have depressed temperatures in India 2 degrees and globally 1 degree for 3 years, with decreasing effect until 6 years later back to pre-operation levels. No discernible effect on monsoon during that time. My questions this last assertion and C testy in response. Monsoon variability increasing for last 30 years, somewhat like California weather in that the average is seldom hit. Most years much higher or lower than average, which is an artifact only. M objects, says thought monsoon was regular as rain in Ireland, crucial to crops and life generally. July through September, daily rain. How variable could it be? Very variable, C replies. Not happy to be challenged on this. Daily rain, a myth. Weeks can pass in August, etc. M looking skeptical, as is B. B intervenes. What are graphs showing? Total rainfall year to year, monsoon-wise. Why no graph? Staff peck around a bit and bring up graph. Monsoon rain indeed, fluctuating, more through last 2 decades. And after their geoengineering, maybe a bit more. Second year after application, particularly low. Semi-drought, especially in the west, another problem. C points out. Monsoon not the same east to west, always that way. M asks what plan is going forward. Are they going to do it again? Because global average temperature is rising again. A few wet bulb 34s in the previous few years, lots of deaths. Wet bulb 35s very likely to happen again somewhere and soon. Exactly, C says, and wet bulb 35 is deadly to all, but even wet bulb 33 is also bad enough to kill lots of people. Of course, M says, so does that mean you're going to do it? C defers to new minister Vikram. V says, we are certainly ready to do it. It will be a more orderly procedure this time, not looking at C as he says this, involving democratic processes and expert consultation, but we are ready. B asks, a double Pinatubo this time, I hear? V, probably yes, this is what intervention was always understood to be. M and B not looking at each other. Finally, M says, there are questions of sovereignty here, I know, but India signed the Paris Agreement along with all other nations, and the agreement has protocols for this kind of thing that all signatories have agreed to adhere to. We may break the treaty, V says, again. That's what we have to decide. B points out penalties for this may be high. Won't be like after heat wave. V, we are aware of that. Part of the deliberative process. Is benefit worth cost? C adds sharply, we won't allow another heat wave, so we can be in compliance with the treaty written up by developed nations outside of the tropics and their dangers. Mary understood. Meeting ends, no one looks happy. Mary asks if she can be taken to see the site of the heat wave. C says no. Nothing to see there, not a tourist site. Even less happiness. B, where to then? Anything you would like to show us? V and C exchange look. Yes, V says. Must stay in Delhi himself, but C can take M and B out to see farms in Karnataka. Farms? New paradigm for farms. Come see. Happy to, claim M and B unconvincingly. Not ag people, really. Next day at Karnataka, after short flight, green. Hills to east, also green. Terraces on slopes, but much land flat. Green of several shades, but also rectangles of yellow, orange, red, purple, dark browns, even pale blue. Flowers of spice crops, apparently. Everything grows here, new local host says. Name Indra Pramit. Best soil and climate on Earth. Now banking 7 parts per thousand of carbon per year. Immense drawdowns. Also food for millions. Local tenure rights for local farmers. No absent landlords anymore except for India herself. The Indian people as represented by Karnataka state. Also the district and village. Stewards of land. Keep room for wild animals in the hedgerows and habitat corridors. Tigers back. Dangerous but beautiful. Gods among us, and all organic. No pesticides at all. Sikkim model now applied to ag all over India. Kerala model for governance, the same. Communist organic farmers, B notes. He thinks it's funny. M doesn't think he should joke. Locals happy to agree at this characterization. Also, these changes mean end of caste's worst impacts, they claim. Dalits now involved, women always half of every panchayat. An old Indian law now applied for real. Now there are farm tenure rights, full ownership of one's work, its surplus value. Women and all castes equal. Hindu and Muslim, Sikh and Jain and Christian, all together in New India. Communist organic farmers, just the tip of the iceberg. Riots we heard about? B asks. Again M annoyed with him. But again host happy to explain. Indra. Some absentee landlords on being eminent domained hired BJP thugs from city to come here and beat people up. It was one-on-one, so satyagraha not so effective. Can't lie down in front of a thug, too much effect. Better tactic against armies, ironically. So had to fight it out, defend selves, swarmed the invaders, beat them up pretty thoroughly, reported as riot, but actually repelling of invaders. Sort of like organic ag, you have to use integrated pest management. B is one tool of integrated pest management targeted assassinations. Global community not happy with murderers of private citizens. A terror tactic, he says, like thuggies of yore, these children of Kali. Yes, Gene, like banana companies do in Latin America, yes. M again staring at him as if thinking he's deliberately trying to be offensive. C also not pleased, says sharply, murder rate never really a concern when poor people are being killed, but terrorists hired by rich people. Turnabout may not be fair play, but not everything that happens is government sponsored, as distinguished visitors well know. Lots of forces unleashed now. Kali just one of the gods in action now. Remember that. So, integrated pest management. Yes. M seizes on this to change topic. How does it work if you get a crop infestation? Insects you don't want. No insecticides to use. What do you do? Indra, there are insecticides. They just aren't poisonous chemicals. Other bugs, mainly. Biological warfare. Does that work? Not always, no. But when crops are lost to infestations, we can't stop. We clear the fields and send all the waste plant material to the vats. They are part of our system too, and include bugs on our side, you might call them, that will eat spoiled crops no problem, eating also the pests that spoiled them. All of that is food for the vats. Vat amoeba don't care what spoiled them. All of the vat amoeba don't care what they eat, being omnivores. And from them we get a kind of flour. Also, the ethanol that powers any machine that still needs to run on liquid fuels. Then for some kinds of infestations, we burn the land, let it lie fallow a season or two, then back in business. Try something different each time. We keep learning things. It's work in progress. So you have microbacterial children of Kali, B jokes. Again, M annoyed. Everything under the sun cycles, Indra says. This perhaps also acknowledges we are all getting cooked in midday sun, mad dogs and Englishmen and Irish women. Even B looks overheated. Locals bear down on their enthusiasm by pointing up. So much sun, it's power, right? We can use solar power to pull water right out of the air, hydrogen out of the water, grow the plants that provide for bioplastics and biofuels for whatever still needs liquid fuel, use hydrogen to power turbines. Sun also helps grow forests that draw down carbon and fuel the biochar burners and provide the wood for building. We are fully recycling solar powerhouse, a green power. Other countries don't have our advantages in sunlight and minerals and people, especially people, and ideas. M and B nodded as politely as they can manage. Heard it before, preaching to converted, hotter than hell out here. The new India, all agree. Our Indian hosts very pleased with how things are going here, but there's an edge to them too. M and B definitely aware of that edge, emanating strongly from C, also from locals. Aggressive pride. Don't tread on me. No outsiders get to tell India what to do. Not anymore. Never again. Post-colonial anger. Post-geoengineering defensiveness. Tired of the Western world condescending to India. All of the above. All right, that was chapter 34. Hold, please. I'm going to take a sip of the carf. That's tasty. Chapter 35. We came into Switzerland on train from Austria. Austria was sending closed trains from Italy through to Switzerland, and in St. Gallen, the Swiss stopped them and required passengers to get off and go through a registration process. That happened to me. Most of the people on our trains were from Algeria or Tunisia, boat people who had landed in Italy hoping to get to France or Suisse romande, where we would speak the language. Getting into Switzerland would be a big step on the way. We were herded through rooms in a giant building, like immigration control buildings at airports, but older. We were interrogated in French, and then we were separated into men and women, which caused a lot of distress and anger. No one understood it until we were led into smaller examination rooms and given a cursory physical that included stripping to the waist and submitting to a chest x-ray. Apparently, they were looking for signs of tuberculosis. That was offensive and disturbing enough that when we were dressed again and reunited with the women, when we found that they had been forced to undergo the same process, which had been administered by women when it came to the x-rays, but run by men in the other parts of the process, we got mad. The whole thing was dehumanizing, and of course, this was not the first time it had happened. Refugees are by definition less than human, having lost their homes. But perhaps it was some kind of last straw. Something about being in Switzerland, which had a reputation as a clean, orderly, lawful place, and then being treated like animals, made us mad. Of course, the irony was not lost on some of us that it was only because we were in Switzerland and expecting to be treated well that such behavior was offensive. In Egypt or Italy, such demeaning treatment would have been expected and thus submitted to. Worse things had happened to us already. Howsoever that may be, we were mad, and when guards marched us back to the trains and we were led to the more southerly tracks, which seemed to be heading back into Austria, many cried out to object, and nothing the guards could say comforted us. We refused to get on trains set on those tracks because it made no sense to us. We had seen other trains using the southern tracks to head east, and we were sure our train would head that direction too. And being herded onto trains has a very bad feel to it, of course. Reinforcements appeared to help the guards herd us, and these had long rifles slung over their shoulders. We shouted at them too. And when they started to unsling their rifles and ship them into firing position, some of the young people charged them, and the rest of us followed. It had been 7 months since leaving Tunisia, and something had snapped in us. None of the Swiss soldiers fired at us, but as we left the railroad sidings and rushed the buildings in a mass, many more soldiers appeared, and suddenly the air was filled with tear gas. Some of us fled, some charged the police line, and in front of that building the fighting got intense. It seemed clear that the police had orders not to shoot us, so we went at them hard. And somehow a gang of young men got one policeman down and got his rifle from him. And one of them shot at the police, and then everything changed. Then it was war, except our side had only that one rifle. We started going down left, right, and center, screaming. Then someone said, "They're rubber bullets. They're just rubber." And we charged again, and in all the confusion, a group of us got inside the building. It was the safest place to be, given what was happening outside. But by the time we had lost our minds, we had seen our people shot down, rubber bullets notwithstanding. So we thrashed everyone we caught in that building, and someone found something flammable and torched the big receiving room. And though it was a small blaze, by no means was the building on fire. Still, there was a lot of smoke, not as painful as the tear gas, but probably worse for one's health over the long haul. We didn't know. We had no idea. We were just lashing out, trying to keep the police out of the building at the same time we were trying to set it on fire. Even with us inside it, I suppose at that point we were on a kind of suicide mission. None of us cared at that point. I will never forget that feeling of lashing out irregardless, of not caring whether I lived or died, of just wanting to maximize damage whatever way I could. If I got killed during doing it, it was fine, as long as there was damage. I wanted the world to suffer like we had. Finally, there was nothing to do but lie on the concrete floor and try to get under the smoke. That worked for most of us, but it meant they could come in and scoop us up and carry us off, trussed up like sheep for slaughter. Later, after the inquiry, we were sent through to France. We were reunited with our families, and ultimately we found that only 6 people died in that riot, none of them Swiss. And damage to the facility was minimal. What remained was that feeling. Oh, I will never forget it. When you lose all hope and all fear, then you become something not quite human. Whether better or worse than human, I can't say, but for an hour, I was not a human being. Right. On to chapter 36. The Arctic Ocean's ice cover melted entirely away in the late summer of 2032, and the winter sea ice that formed in the following winter was less than a meter thick and broken up by winds and currents into jumbled islands of pancake ice, separated by skim ice or brash ice, or even open leads and internal ice-bordered seas many kilometers wide. So that when spring came and the sun hit, that winter's skimpy ice quickly melted and the constant summer sunlight penetrated deep into the Arctic waters, which it warmed quite a bit, which thus thinned the next winter's ice even more. This was a feedback loop with teeth. The Arctic ice cap, which at its first measurement in the 1950s was more than 10 meters thick, had been a big part of Earth's albedo. During northern summers, it had reflected as much as 2 or 3% of the sun's incoming insolation back into space. Now that light was instead spearing into the ocean and heating it up, and for reasons not fully understood, the Arctic and the Antarctic were already the most rapidly warming places on Earth. This meant also that the permafrost ringing the Arctic and in Siberia and Alaska and Canada and Greenland and Scandinavia was melting faster and faster, which meant the release of a great deal of permafrost carbon and also methane, a greenhouse gas 20 times stronger than CO2 in its ability to capture heat in the atmosphere. Arctic permafrost contained as much stored methane as all the Earth's cattle would create and emit over 6 centuries. And this giant burp, if released, would almost certainly push Earth over an irreversible tipping point into jungle planet mode, completely ice-free, at which point sea level would be 110 meters higher than at present, with global average temperatures at least 5 or 6 degrees Celsius higher and probably more, rendering great stretches of the Earth uninhabitable by humans. At that point, civilization would be over. Some remainder of humanity might adapt to the new biosphere, but they would be a post-traumatic remnant in a post-mass extinction world. That being the case, efforts were being made to thicken the Arctic sea ice in winter, which would allow it to hold on longer through the summers. These efforts were awkward at best. Arctic winters were still sunless and cold, and a skim of ice covered most of the sea. And there was no good and obvious method to thicken that ice. So, to begin with, a number of methods were tried and evaluated. One involved running autonomous amphibious craft over the outer edge of the winter sea ice as soon as it formed, each craft pumping up seawater from the still liquid ocean nearby, then spraying it into the air in a fine spray that would freeze before it came down. This flocking making thicker the outermost border of the sea ice, and hopefully thus slowing its breakup when the sun arrived in spring. This worked in a limited way, but it would take thousands of such vehicles to adequately thicken the sea ice, and each vehicle could only be created at the expense of a certain amount of carbon burned into the atmosphere. Nevertheless, it was felt worth doing, despite the expense in money, materials, and carbon burn associated with construction of the amphibians. Now that the cost of losing the sea ice was clearly seen to be hugely more important than the financial cost of preventing the loss, the financial cost was no longer a stopper to this plan proceeding. Then, as airship factories were proliferating all around the world, it was possible to make some that would fly over the Arctic sea ice every winter, powered by batteries, pumping up water from holes punched in the thinnest sea ice to fill tanks, and then spray that water onto the surface ice below, where it also froze and fell as flocking, and thus thicken the ice. As in the Antarctic pumping efforts, it felt at first like sucking the ocean through a drinking straw. Minuscule efforts, teensy effects. A sick little joke, but every good work has to begin somewhere, and really, if these projects didn't succeed, what would follow was so dire to contemplate that the efforts were judged worth making, minuscule or not. The third method was to drop on the winter ice clouds of small plastic machines, each of which had a solar panel and a drill and a pump and a little sprayer, so that the machine could puncture the ice, draw up some water, and cast it into the air to freeze. Eventually, these machines would get buried in snow by way of their own efforts, and then they would shut off and wait for spring and summer to come, when they would float to the surface, if enough snow melted, and wait to be refrozen into the top of the ice the following fall, where they could start all over again. Thousands and then even millions of these could be distributed. If their work went well enough, they would eventually stay trapped in the thickening sea ice for centuries to come. There were even small bits of carbon sequestration, as some pointed out in little attempts at a joke. But still, it was awkward, very awkward, awkward as hell. Nothing they tried in this effort worked very well, which meant that was chapter 36. 1 second here. All right. I think this is the last chapter I'm going to read. This is chapter 37. And then I'm going to move on to other things to do in my day. Chapter 37. This is hard to write. I was born in Libya, I'm told, and after my father disappeared, no one knows how or why, my mother took my sister and me to Europe on a boat that carried mostly Tunisians. They made it to Trieste and were transferred by train to Saint-Gallen, Switzerland, where we were caught up in the riot there. That's my first memory. Lots of us running into a building and everyone screaming, and my eyes burning from the tear gas. My mom tried to shield us inside her sweater, so I didn't see very much, but my eyes still burned. A woman and her 2 little girls, all crying our eyes out. I don't remember much about the days that followed. The Swiss took care of us better than the sailors on the boat had. We were fed and had beds in a big dormitory with showers and toilets and a compound next to it. It felt good to be clean and dry and not hungry. Mother finally stopped crying. Then we were taken to a room and introduced to a group of people who spoke in French to us. Eventually, Mother was invited to a refugee shelter just outside of Winterthur, and she eagerly and gratefully agreed to go. My sister and I were scared to move again, but Mother assured us it was for the best. So we got on a train again and said goodbye to the shelter in Saint-Gallen, which in truth had been the nicest place we had ever lived, but off we went. The shelter outside Winterthur was in a beautiful garden. On certain days, we could see the Alps and Glarus very far away. We hadn't known that the world was as big as that, and at first, it made me scared. How could we get along in a world so big? Jake was one of the regular visitors to our shelter. His French was slow but clear, and he had a look on his face that right from the start I knew was different, as if he was suffering even more than we were. I wanted to tell him that we were all right. He taught English to both children and adults in different classes, mornings for children, afternoon and evenings for adults. He spent most of every day there, Sundays included. At lunch, he sat with us and ate. Sometimes at meals, he sat there looking at us with his eyes moving back and forth, side to side, as if he was tracking a bird or having a thought. He seemed fond of us, and like all the sponsors, he grew to spend more time with particular refugees, greeting us by name and asking how we were doing in both French and later English. That went on for a long time. Later, I learned it was almost a year, and then Mother told us that she was going to marry Jake, and we would all move in with him in a nearby village. My sister and I had no inkling that this might happen, and at first we were surprised and uncertain. The shelter was again the nicest place we had ever known, and going off with a single one of our helpers into the unknown struck us as a bad idea. We didn't know what was going on between Mother and this man with the twitchy eyes, and we suspected the worst. But in fact, we moved nearby into a little 2-story white house with a walled garden beside it. And we settled in quickly and went back often to the shelter to see our friends there. Jake and Mother were always warm and cordial to each other, although they were never openly affectionate in front of us. But we could see that Mother was fond of him and grateful to him, and he was always very kind to us and always spoke to us in a mix of English and French, so that it seemed like the two languages were one. And later it took some sorting out on our part to get the two into the separate places in our heads. In that effort, Arabic seemed to slip away. So we were a little family for a few years. From when I was 7 until I was 11, we went to school in Winterthur, played with friends from school and from the shelter, and all was well. In those years, my mother was happy. Then, when I started going to middle school, I began to see signs that things were not well between my mother and Jake. They would sit in our kitchen after dinner, looking at their screens or out the window. Watching them together, I saw something that struck me very strongly. Even just sitting there doing nothing, they were very different people. My mother is a calm person. She pours herself into a chair and relaxes there like a cat. Her eyes will move, her hands will do some sewing or knitting, but her body is still as can be. This is somewhat her nature. We're lucky to have her. Jake, on the other hand, would sit there, and yet he wasn't even close to still. Not that he fidgeted or tapped his foot or anything like that. It was just that you could see that he was spinning inside. It was like you could see all his atoms spinning the way they are said to do. If people could be rated for their spins like atoms or car engines, the mother would be almost motionless while Jake was always spinning at thousands or even millions of revolutions per minute. RPM 10 million, he said once. This whole image I am giving you comes from one of his own ways of assessing people. He would say we were all like quarks, which are the smallest elementary particles, he told us, smaller even than atoms, such that atoms are all made up of quarks held together by gluons. He made us laugh with these stories, and like quarks, everyone had a certain amount of strangeness, spin, and charm. You could rate everyone by these three constants. And our mother was the most charming person on earth, but not very strange, and with almost zero spin. Jake confessed to having a high spin rate, also strangeness, and we found him charming too. He didn't agree to that. So sometimes he would sit in his chair at the end of a day at the shelter, obviously exhausted, and his eyes would be moving left, right, which I think takes a lot of effort. And somehow it was clear that he was spinning. There was something dark inside him. Mother said he had done development work in his youth and that he had seen some bad things. We believed it. Sometimes he would stare at us and sit hard on the floor and give us a hug. "How I love you," he would say. "You are such wonderful girls." Other times he would stare at us with his body rigid and his face contorted, clutching the sides of his chair as if preparing to leap to his feet and dash from the room. It was frightening to see that. Then times came when he would shout at Mother and even at us. He would leap to his feet, he would dash from the room, but sometimes first he would shout at her, in English, it seemed, but we couldn't understand it, and besides, we were too scared to listen. He ran from the room at those times. It was so shocking at first. Then it became something that could happen, something we were watchful for, so that when he was friendly or contrite and remorseful, we would take it with a grain of salt, not knowing if he might turn on us in a second. Volatile people, you can't trust them. That's the thing, and they know it. So that even if they feel remorse, it does no good, and they know that too. So they get lonely, and they feel the remorse less and less maybe. They give up. In any case, he left. One day, Mother woke us. She was crying as she told us that he wouldn't be coming back, that we would have to move again. We all sat on the stairs and cried. Ah, man, we'll leave it right there. That's a very sad chapter. All right, guys. Thanks for, do I not have my, arg. Don't believe I have my phone with me. I think I left it somewhere. I can't really check and see if I got any donations. Denver, $6 for a New York Times, Sunday New York Times? Jesus. I mean, eventually things get so expensive that people are going to stop buying things. Right? It's when prices go so out of control. There's going to be a big swing the other direction because eventually nobody's going to have money to buy these things. So, all right, guys. I don't know. I don't have my phone with me, so I don't know if I got any donations. But I'll thank everybody tomorrow. I'll see you all tomorrow at 4 p.m. Black Bear News, regular time, 4 p.m. tomorrow. That's on a Monday. It is Sunday today. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And until next time, peace.